Well, good evening, and welcome to Wide Awake News. I'm Gary Hendershot, your host for the Alternative Energy Hour. This is a weekly segment where I do the first hour on Monday, and tonight Charlie will be doing the second hour with his guest, Ed Corcoran. But tonight, my guest on the Alternative Energy Hour is a fellow named Joel Garbon, who is probably pretty well known by those who follow the alternative energy scene. Joel is the president of the New Energy Movement. His website, for anybody who might like to take a quick peek, is newenergymovement.org. Newenergymovement.org. He's also co-authored a book with Jeane Manning called Breakthrough Power: How Quantum Leap New Energy Inventions Can Transform Our World. And that can be attacked at breakthroughpower.net. Breakthroughpower.net is the website to take a look at that. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to bring in Joel Garbon. Joel, how you doing, man? It has been a little while since we've talked. Last time you were on, I think we were talking about how a breakthrough energy technology might have unintended consequences on things. And I recently read an article published by a mutual associate of ours, Sterling Allen, over at PESN.com, that indicated there are some new and exciting things happening in the world of Joel Garbon. So please illuminate us, bring us up to date, give us an idea of what you've been up to recently.
Well, thanks, Gary. It's great to be back on your show. It's been a couple months, and that last program, that was a lot of fun. We don't often get a chance to talk about the unseen consequences of a real energy breakthrough, because we're all kind of get a little starry-eyed about all the beautiful positive implications, but we got to be balanced and consider all the implications. As far as what I'd like to bring your audience up to speed on tonight is some of the developments that have been going on inside our organization, which is the New Energy Movement. And a lot of this has to do with the subject of vetting breakthrough technologies, particularly vetting the performance claims that we find propagated on the internet by many different dozens of inventors. And what is the consensus of our colleagues in this field is that we need a few things that haven't really been in place up to this time. And one of those is a standardized set of testing protocols to help validate these performance claims. Right now, there are probably, maybe a few dozen different vetting entities out there. Some of them might be some lone specialists. Others might be small groups. There might be laboratories involved, even universities. But what's safe to say is that there probably is not a uniform set of testing methodologies that are being applied to the assessment of an inventor's performance claims. And that has some real fallout. One of which is that we know that there's been a number of times where these claims have been made that turn out to be highly exaggerated. And oftentimes the protocols that might be honestly applied for testing by a third-party vetting entity really may not be well or sufficiently equipped and using proper scientific protocols to determine whether the performance claims are really valid. So what ends up happening in a case like that is the technology may end up getting propagated on the internet and go far beyond where it should have gone. If it was a technology that really did not have merit and should have been pretty much stopped in its tracks because the performance claims were invalid, that would be the end of it right there. And there would be no more time wasted in pursuing a technology like that or squandering the resources and time of so many of us in this field who are really trying to find the good stuff, the stuff that should go forward to the marketplace, should enter the public domain, and should be part of what brings about a transformation of the energy scene on this planet. So, that's a piece that's been missing right now, or some standardized test methodologies. There are methodologies that are out there, but they tend to be in little bits and pieces here and there, but really haven't been brought into one centralized packet of standards that could be applied to a range of technologies. So that's definitely one thing we'll be talking about tonight.
I guess it would help if I turned on my microphone. Thinking about the so-called inventor. Okay, now I've been working on this widget for 20 years. I've got many thousands of dollars and many thousands of man hours in wiring this whiz-bang gadget together. In my heart, I think it works. I've looked at this thing and it does all kinds of neat tricks, and maybe I'm using some cheap Chinese meters or something to gauge my input and output power, and maybe I don't know how to read a meter properly, but that's okay. To me, it looks like the darn thing works. Now, the idea for me is I want to present my gizmo to potential investors and maybe reap my rewards. I've been working long and hard on this thing, put a lot of money in it. I'd like to get a couple of investors to maybe take a look at it, sniff at it, and maybe bestow piles and piles of Federal Reserve notes on me so I can live a lavish lifestyle. So what is the advantage to me to deal with an organization like what you're talking about? What do I get out of it? I mean, is this going to help me get my message in front of potential investors, or is it more likely to hinder me?
Well, if the inventor does have a technology of merit, and that's the term that I'm trying to encourage be used here to help identify which technologies really are valid in their claims of having some remarkable energy benefit. And that should then be propagated to the marketplace. If the inventor truly has something like that, then having a standardized set of test protocols that can be applied by any number of vetting entities in a third-party basis, that should result in a certification of their technology with essentially a third-party stamp of approval. And that becomes highly valuable then to the inventor in his search for the resources to bring this thing from a pre-manufacturing prototype forward through the technology incubation and finally into the marketplace. So you could think of it like this, if you had Underwriters Laboratory, for instance, puts their stamp of approval as a certified technology, that's highly valuable. But
now we're gonna start hearing the bumper music in about 10-15 seconds here, telling us that we're headed out for our first break. But while we're on the break, and when we come back from the break, I'd like you to come at it from the investor point of view. My first question was, okay, what's this going to do for the inventor? But when we come back from this break, I'd like you to be thinking about, okay, now I'm on the other side of the coin. I'm an investor who might be interested in investing in an alternative energy technology. What can an organization like yours do for that guy? And, okay, that break is 15 seconds late already. Trying to get the timing down on these things, and I'm going to have to talk to that producer about the timing on the issue. I thought I was getting us all set up to go out for the break. I was expecting to hear that bumper music in any second, and it looks like we're running 1 minute behind. But
okay,
very quickly, we got about 30 seconds before we hear that bumper music. Is there an advantage to the investor?
Oh, most definitely. In fact, that will be one of the huge benefits here that help to line up the technologies of merit with the needed capital to move these things forward. Because part of the thing that's been a big problem in this field is the capital and people behind it. They see that there's fraudulent technologies propagated, and so their willingness to risk is highly diminished.
All righty. Well, Joel, keep your thoughts, because I want to talk a little bit more about the advantages to the investor in an alternative energy technology. when we get back from this brief commercial announcement. We'll be right back, folks. Stand by. And we're back from our first break in the evening, and I hope you folks did pay attention to those blatant commercial advertisements, and please do show our advertisers a little love. Without them, we got no show. But, during that little brief intermission, Joel and I had a little bit of back and forth discussing some of the issues that I think are relevant to what he's discussing. And Joel, we touched very briefly on why the inventor might find this to be advantageous. We gave him a little bit of a teaser on why the investor might find what you're talking about of some advantage. But, you're setting yourself up as United Underwriters Labs for alternative energy widgets. Okay? Now, as an investor, how do I know that the information you give me is going to be sane and reliable? And as the inventor, how do I know you're going to give me a fair shake? How do I know you haven't taken a payoff from the oil industry and you're just going to scuttle my nifty widget for no good reason? I mean, I need you to address those issues so we can get kind of a warm fuzzy that, what you're going to provide is actually a good, valid service and not something that, like some politicians in Washington, can simply be bought.
Well, these are all really good questions, Gary, and I want to address each one of these things with a little bit of substance because it's critical to whether this whole program even ends up making sense and has any merit at all. When you bring up the question of how do I trust whether a certification from this group here, let's say it's a certification that is being facilitated by New Energy Movement. You have to look at who's behind the organization first. And right now, you're looking at one of the key people behind New Energy Movement. We've been involved in this scene for 10 years, and that whole time, we've done a lot of things, I believe, they're more recognized, I think, by other people who've been in the scene similarly for at least that length of time. But we've been an all-volunteer group through this time, and each of us who are at the core of this, we have our own day jobs that we have to support our families, and then we have been working as strong advocates and educators in this field pretty much in the cracks of our time. So in the evenings, the weekends, where we can to help move this forward the best way we can. And what it really comes down to from my standpoint is, do you trust these people? And do they have a track record of delivering on what they say they're going to do? Have they demonstrated integrity over the long term? Are the relationships that they have intact the types of relationships that you would want to have with trusted friends and amongst your own family? I would not even have brought up the idea of New Energy Movement facilitating a service as important as a breakthrough energy vetting service and certification if I didn't feel like we could stand boldly in front of an audience and say, we are worthy of your trust. And don't take my word for it, but please check with all of these others who've been in the field for some time. And, one thing that I know for me when I started in this, back when, I first was meeting with Brian O'Leary and Jeane Manning and Tom Vallone, a number of others who had been in this field much, much longer than me, was the seriousness of walking this walk with integrity and a real dedication to what the larger goal is in mind. And that is nothing short of a transformation of the way we generate and utilize energy on this planet because of the implications for humanity and our companion species here. And taking that very seriously because each of us as individuals, and certainly as family members, in my own case as a father and grandfather, the stakes are very high for our progeny. I want to see my children have a beautiful, healthy, balanced world to grow up and raise their own families in. And I want to see that for everyone else's children and grandchildren as well. So I'm not asking anyone to believe me on face value that the integrity is here. I think it's something that you need to reach out to other people. It's why we have things that are called references. If you have any type of you're going in for a job interview or submitting an application, one of the first things that you have to apply there are your references there, and it's expected that those are going to be checked out. And I think that you would find that anyone who digs in to people who are central to New Energy movement as it stands right now would find that we do walk our talk. We do honor the relationships, the contracts, and agreements that we make because we take these very seriously. Beyond what the effects of these things might be materially, but because the relationships are very important to us, and certainly to me personally. Those who know me closest know that I am pretty well known for saying that I really don't know what the highest outcome is from all of these endeavors for everyone who's in the new energy field. I really do not know what is going to be the best outcome from this. And so I tend to be very close to the vest as far as my own feelings on what those highest outcomes might be. But I can tell you this, the relationships that have been developed through this whole process have been extremely valuable. And those are things that I think we all can point to as something that does enrich our lives.
All right, Joel, I'm sorry.
I'm hearing and talk to this with more substance on the next segment.
I'm hearing that music in the background, so we are going to have to cut away for a break at this time. Please do stick with us, folks. We'll be back right after these commercial messages. And we're back from the break with my guest, Joel Garbon. Joel, we've hit kind of some of the high points, but we haven't really heard the executive summary. I assume you've got kind of an executive briefing you can give us on just how this process works. I mean, I would think of it in terms of like a business plan, but you might have some other words for it. But just how do you expect it to work?
All right, so these are the kind of nuts and bolts of what we like to do here. First, there's mutual agreement in our colleagues in the new energy field that we need a standard set of test protocols. And the main reason for that is because, as I touched on before, we have a lot of performance claims that are being propagated out there on the internet. And it's causing a number of different groups to try to sort through what's real and what isn't. And it's being approached in kind of a cowboy mentality, I think. We're kind of like riding out onto the scene and checking it out. Maybe the way it's being vetted is rigorous. Maybe it's not. Maybe some people are saying, well, they have in their gut that it's real and all this and that. Well, that doesn't really buy a lot at the end of the day, saying what your gut feeling is on whether a technology is valid or not. We definitely need some real rigorous protocols that have been agreed upon and developed by qualified technical personnel who come together as a technical committee to develop the protocol. Let's say there's one for the low energy nuclear reaction class of breakthrough technology. So there'd be a body that comes together comprised of experts in that field and who have expertise in the instrumentation that might be used to make measurements in that field. They come together as a technical committee and would write that protocol, develop it themselves. They sign off on it. There's an accountable body there that has weighed in, and that becomes the initial standard test protocol for that genre of technology. Now, there might be magnetic technologies that then have a separate committee that comes together, expert committee, if you will, and they write that protocol, and so on. And we'd hope to have, within some number of months, a handful of these that would represent, let's say, the top 80% of the various genres that seem to be most prevalent out there. Now, right away, what this does is it gives the inventor the opportunity when he is assessing his own technology to establish the performance claims for that technology. He can now apply a good prescription to doing just that, because he'll have these protocols that have actually been developed by a number of experts who've agreed on these standards. So by the inventor applying those standards and establishing his performance claims, he's going to have a high level of confidence that the technology actually has merit, as opposed to one where he may have not properly understood the science or didn't have the right instrumentation, or any number of well-intended mistakes that were made. Because the big problem we've had here as a field is that the new energy scene has been littered with all kinds of claims that turn out to not hold up. And that has wasted an enormous amount of time. It's caused a lot of damage to the credibility of this field. It's wasted a lot of financial resources and personal energy from dozens and dozens of people who've been in this for quite some time. And so we got to have something that helps to cut through this. And so what we expect is that with the inventor community now having something that they can use as solid benchmarks to evaluate their own technologies against first, they can establish good, valid performance claims. So what we think is going to happen there is the number of technologies that have no merit will be weeded out and will no longer be propagated on the internet. That will then result in a much more concentrated stream of technologies of merit that then can attract the attention, can then be have vetting teams of professionals who are skilled in the art to then come and do a third-party certification using those exact same protocols. And so there's no surprises on what's going to happen here, because the inventor already, if they've done this properly, would have already applied those protocols in establishing the performance claims to begin with. And now those will be validated by a third party of experts that come into the scene to perform that service. And then their certification report and statement of performance becomes essentially a seal of approval that becomes very valuable for that inventor to carry forward in his search for resources. Now, it's very important that the vetting team and the certifying body, which in this case I'm suggesting New Energy Movement as the certifying body and as a facilitator to get the qualified teams of vetting specialists on board. I don't mean that they're going to be employees of New Energy Movement, because they would not be, but they would be teams that would be selected by New Energy Movement as an independent body to then go in and be the assessment team. And it would never be one individual that does that. There'd be multiple individuals to help have checks and balances against the possibility of there being a vested interest. We do not want to have a vested interest either in the vetting specialists or with the certifying body, in this case, New Energy Movement. Now, I can state right here that we have no vested interest. Any of us who are at the core of New Energy Movement, we do not have vested interests in these technologies. It's more difficult for me to make such a claim for other individuals who might be part of the pool of candidates to be expert vetting professionals here. But by having those individuals sign off essentially on disclaimers, which is that's a legal document where they are claiming that they have no vested interest in the particular technology that they're going to vet, and will not try to gain an interest in that technology for some period of time, maybe 3 years or 5 years or what have you, to help keep this thing an arm's length certification and transaction. That helps bring this to a much higher state of credibility. And there'll be some things that need to be worked out on that. But one thing that is for certain is that there needs to be an accountable party that is overseeing this and who does it consistently and fairly. That's one of the things that I feel I bring to that picture. For those who know me, know that I operate in that way. I want things to be done with integrity. I want there to be a lot of checks and balances, and I want there to be some written accountability of these things that are conforming to a standard that's been agreed upon, not just someone's gut or someone's intuition or a few little friends that are trotting off to do something, and then say, hey, we saw something cool, you got to believe us. All right, that's not the way this would work. This has to be done in a very professional manner. And I have a lot of experience with that in the industry that I work in right now. I've worked with a lot of bodies that do technology assessments in the water treatment field. And I've been on protocol development committees as well for certain states, even like the state of New Jersey, and been doing that for a few years. So that's one piece of this that's very key, Gary. So we've got a set of protocols. We got a pool of candidates who are technically qualified to do the vetting as third-party, independently contracted vetting specialists. And those people would be paid out of a fund that New Energy Movement has called the Global Energy Freedom Fund. That fund would be paid for by donations from the public who understand the importance of doing this.
All right, Joel, I'm hearing the bumper music in the background, and I'm afraid it was playing over that last sentence. When we come back, I do want to kind of hit on the highlights of where the sources of revenue will be, because that's obviously an important consideration. We do live in a capitalist society, and that is something that we do need to discuss. Folks, we'll be back right after these messages. And we're back from that break, and I believe we are now in our last segment. So I'll tell you, if there's any nasty details that we have not yet covered, we got to make sure we get them covered now. So Joel, just before we skipped out for the break, we were talking a little bit about, okay, an organization like what you're talking about is going to have expenses. You're going to have to buy test equipment. You're going to have to move personnel and equipment to various locations to actually examine these potential technologies. Frankly, it's going to cost a lot of money. And we do, of course, for at least the time being, live in what's loosely referred to as a capitalist society where, something like this has to be funded by somebody.
Exactly.
So who do you figure is going to be willing to pay for this? Because, in a lot of people's minds, it's that source of revenue. I mean, I made the analogy of the real estate agent. If I'm looking to buy a home and I go and talk to the real estate agent, is that real estate agent working for me, or is that real estate agent working for the person selling the home? And I have to keep that in the back of my mind, who is this guy working for? Who's writing his paycheck? So please do give us it's a dirty detail, but in our society, it is something that needs to be fully disclosed. Where will you expect to get your sources of revenue?
Oh, this is a very important question, Gary. So right now, I'm going to give you an example from standard industry right now. I work, as far as my day job and what supports my family, I work in the water treatment industry. And I'm an inventor of a water filtration technology. And the company that I work with, we had to go through a verification and certification process with a third-party entity that came and verified our performance claims. Now, in that case, the cost of us doing that ranged in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. In fact, just to have the verification entity not even come and look at our technology and actually put their hands on it and test equipment around it, but simply for them to examine our own internally generated test report cost $40,000 just for that, before anyone even came and put their hands on anything. So it just goes to show in the real world and where you're dealing with technologies, and these independent test agencies, and it might be someone like Underwriters Laboratories, and there are others like that. And I'm not suggesting that's the one I was involved with, because it's not. This is a different one. But the expense is very high, and in my case, this was for a company that's a well-financed company and could pay for that. But when we're talking now for inventors of breakthrough energy technologies who in most cases are not well funded, and they don't even yet have a company organized around their invention, very few of them would be able to cover the expense of having a quality, scientifically sound third-party vetting. We fully understand that. And see, this has been one of the barriers to having some of these technologies come through in a big way to the marketplace, is the whole cost and credibility around the vetting process. And that's why we're even having this conversation right now. So our idea is that New Energy Movement will establish a fund called the Global Energy Freedom Fund that will provide the financial resources to pay for the vetting service. And so New Energy Movement, as a nonprofit, we're a 501c3 public charity. Donations to New Energy Movement are tax deductible. And the supporters of New Energy Movement, the donors to our organization, a very significant portion of their donation would go into the Global Energy Freedom Fund. And then that fund is exclusively used for the vetting service. So in this case, where an inventor is identified, he already has done and established his own performance claims according to the set of standardized test protocols that will be developed. He will then make the request that a third-party vetting comes out to check out his performance claims. So New Energy Movement selects from a pool of candidates the technical specialists that then go out and do that vetting, and those would be independently contracted vetting professionals. And the cost of that vetting, which would include the instrumentation required to cover the expenses to get them there, for their time, for the report writing, which can be a very substantial part of the expense. This would come out of the Global Energy Freedom Fund. That's where that comes from. So the inventor himself, if he has no resources to pay for the expense or a portion of the expense, actually those expenses will be covered from the public themselves, who understands the importance of what we are talking about here. So the fund would cover those expenses. Now, what that does is one, that gives the inventor a tremendous advantage here now, because there's no longer a barrier to entry to his technology, if it's really a technology of merit, going through the vetting process, because he's going to be able to get through it, even though he doesn't have the funds to pay for a third-party vetting and certification. The other aspect of that is having the New Energy Movement Global Energy Freedom Fund pay the vetting specialists. They now, instead of riding out like cowboys and not having their expenses covered, in most cases prior to this time, they probably would have a strong interest in setting up a vested interest in a technology that proves to really potentially bear fruit. They're going to want to get a piece of the action, essentially. Well, in this case, with us actually paying their expenses and insisting on the contract that is executed with them for them to be the team that goes out to do the vetting, there will be no vested interest, but they will be paid for their services and their expenses will be covered, because these are real costs, and there's got to be a serious exchange that occurs here. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to attract the real professionals that do this in an upstanding way. And so the integrity of this whole process becomes the real merit and value of what we're attempting to do. Now, from the donating public here, what they get to see is that the verification reports that come about from this end up being posted on the New Energy Movement website and the websites of some allies like the Global Breakthrough Energy Movement, probably PezWiki, and some other places. So the inventor who has a real technology of merit gets the exposure that he desires to help bring the capital and the business teams and the engineering talent to marshal his technology from the pre-manufacturing prototype into something that's market ready.
Well, now, how do you do triage? Now, you're liable to get overwhelmed with requests from various backyard, garage, and basement engineers who swear up and down they've come up with the next great widget. Now, obviously, I don't care how generous the public might be. I don't care how many, Ford foundations and Rockefeller foundations come dump money at your feet. Yeah, right. But obviously, you're going to have finite resources. How do you do that initial triage to decide which ones you actually investigate and which ones you say, we'd like to, but we've only got so many resources. We can only do so much.
The great question. The first will be that the standardized test protocols that are developed over the next number of months by these volunteer technical committees that will come together to actually craft the protocols. The inventor will have needed to first establish his performance claim using those protocols. So we're not going to consider going and sending out a vetting team to an inventor unless they've already tested and established their performance claims to those protocols. So that's the first way of kind of threshing some of the wheat there. So we're not just going to send people out willy-nilly at great cost simply to find out that we're just chasing down a bunch of technologies that really have no merit. So at a minimum, the inventor will already have had to undergo his own testing with using these standardized test protocols. There still is it's still incumbent upon the inventor to garner some resources, some financial resources to do the basics here. If he's gotten the resources to build a pre-manufacturing prototype, we're assuming that he's also going to be able to get the resources to do some rudimentary testing on this that follows standardized test protocols, and that's just going to be one of the requirements in order to get to that next level. And we feel that rigor is very important here for us to establish something that's very credible, very consistent, something that the investor community can really lean on as a dependable certification service. Because what we want is for these third-party certifications to really mean something. And that means that when an inventor has a third-party certification from New Energy Movement, that they know that that's something that is going to turn into money in the bank for them as far as getting their technology financed, the engineering talent coming to them, the business team talent coming to them to take this thing from a pre-manufacturing prototype toward a really marketable product.
Joel, I tell you, we've only got a matter of about 30 or 45 seconds left. But before we bail out on here, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. It was illuminating. But please, pitch your website, pitch your book, get it out there one more time before we hear that bumper music. Tell the folks how they can find out more about Joel Garbon and what goes on in your life.
Thanks, Gary. Go to New Energy Movement, and that's www.newenergymovement.org. And you can read more about this under the NEM News, New Energy Movement News. You'll see it there as an article posted recently there. It's actually a letter to our supporters. You'll find it. And then the Breakthrough Power book. You can get to the link off the New Energy Movement website directly, or you can go to breakthroughpower.net.
Great. Your timing was perfect. See, I hear that bumper music lighting up in the background. Joel Garbon, thank you so much for being my guest on the Alternative Energy Hour tonight, and I wish you a lot of luck. I hope this thing goes together because, frankly, we need it.
Thanks, Gary.
You have a good evening, sir. And to my audience, thank you very much for listening to tonight's Alternative Energy Hour. And if you're patient for just a little bit, right after these messages, Charlie McGrath will be by with his guest, Ed Corcoran, this evening. Take care now.